Welcome back. This is episode 2 of Manic and Chill on the DLF platform. We're going live on Facebook today, and we're going to be back another Sunday. Who knows how many Sundays going forward, but this is number 2, and hopefully many, many more in the future. But this is episode 2 of Manic and Chill. I'm Scott Connor at Charles Chill FFB, and I'm with Shane Manila at Shane is the Worst on Twitter. And today we're going to be talking about contention windows. How do you play Dynasty? Do you play in a window, 2 years, 3 years, 1 year? Some people play for the right now. Other people are always playing for a couple years in the future. So Shane, I'll kick it to you first. How are you doing? Glad to be back with you for another week. But second, I wanted to have you talk about this topic because this was your baby that you wanted to discuss, and I'm happy to discuss it. So first of all, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm super. I get to talk to you again 2 weeks in a row. DLF hasn't revoked our rights to this channel yet. We got through one episode without any profanity, which I'm personally proud of. I don't know that I've ever gone a half an hour in my entire life of speaking without profanity. So that's a big moment. And really, a couple things. One, I wanted to just hit on a couple of things because I know a few people hit us up and they're like, man, they should make this a podcast. Yeah, I have no idea. You talk to DLF about that. If they want to rip this and make it a podcast or not. But either way, even if they don't, just, play it on your phone on YouTube and just let it run in your car or whatever. And there you got a podcast. Just don't close the browser.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I know, man. I do the same every time. I'm like, I'm going to watch this video on YouTube. And then I'm like, I need to go on Twitter, and then it's down.
Exactly. You minimize that screen and boom, it's gone. You got to start it again. I get it.
But you know what? That's fine too, because that gets us more views. But if you want this to be a podcast, I don't know, email at dlfideas.com or something.
I don't think that would go anywhere.
No, probably not.
You can screenshot one of us. Yeah. On Twitter or something, and we can forward it over to the powers that be and see if there's any chance it can be ripped to a podcast.
Just DM them. Ryan McDowell loves when people jump in his DMs about absolutely nothing. So just send it to him. So just the other thing, I just want people to understand this show is going to be a lot of theoretical discussion. If you're looking for specific players, specific player talk, I would say consider this show kind of a companion, a compendum. That's not a word, an addendum to those types of podcasts where, and not everything we throw out there, we might even necessarily believe. It might be something that just kind of piqued our interest and we want to talk through it. But if you're looking to come for your top 10 buys of 2020, probably not going to be this show, maybe once in a while, but not often.
Yeah.
And then, so finally, digging into the windows. So one of those a companion podcast you can listen to, the Dynasty Trades HQ, that I get to host with my buddies. We did a live stream this week, sometime a few days ago, and Kevin, the FF engineer, shot out a question for the panel of what's our window to compete in. And that made me think. I immediately shot out 3 years because, as I've talked about before, my brain works this or that. My brain has trouble with going, oh, okay, there's more than that. And your answer was actually better. And I wish no one listened to it because then I could have stole it. But I think in a couple weeks, when people forget that you said it, I'm just going to pretend it was my answer. So we're looking at windows. And this is in startups, redrafts, whatever. We're looking at what type of windows are you looking at? Are you trying to build or construct a roster that you think can compete for 5 years, 4 years, 6 years? Because it's Dynasty, 1 year, 2 years. So what type of windows do you play in? So I immediately shout out 2 years, which I thought was bold until I heard your answer, and I liked your answer so much better. What was your response on that, if you recall? Because if not, I'll steal it. I swear to God, I will steal the idea.
Well, I give you proprietary rights along with myself to use this answer going forward. My answer was basically I just play with assets, and there isn't really a window because I do think, we're talking specifically about an existing league here. I think that was the context we asked the question the other day. If you're in an existing league, you're probably already going to know kind of how that league runs, right? Like you're going to already know how the people in that league treat draft picks, or how many people are always constantly trying to rebuild, or how many players are trying to win now. So if you already have the idea of what all the other windows are for the other league mates, it's a little easier to adjust yours. But I think if you just take an asset stance on a team, you're really always able to apply it regardless of who else is in your league. So, I generally just play where I have a process. Anyone that's ever listened to my content or listened to me talk, generally, and it's probably why we're here doing this show, is this isn't a show that's going to talk about what players to draft, or what player would you take in a startup over this player. Player versus player. I mean, I'll give you my answer, right? But a lot of times it's just opinion based, and a lot of times my answer is based on who do I think the other people in my league are going to value more. Assets essentially. So you might say, well, I like this player better for next year, or he has a 2-year window that might be better. I'm simply looking at it from an asset standpoint. So startups, let's just take a startup, for example. We'll start there. In a startup, before I make a pick on a player, clearly you're trying to construct a roster. So forget about, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of the league settings. All of those matter. How many players you start, what positions are important, all that stuff can drive player value. But just from a standpoint of when I'm picking a player, generally I want to pick those players at least early on in drafts, right? Not round 20 of a startup. Sometimes there's points where you just buy points, or you're just buying a starting spot or a bench spot in a certain spot. But early in a startup, I'm really looking to just get players that I know either A, their market value is going to go up, or B, I know other people in the league already value, and they may have even just a buzz that I just want to take them because I know they're going to be more valuable. They're more valuable once I get them on my roster. Perfect example is like Gardner Minshew in Superflex. He's one of those guys that, do you really think he's going to be a starter past 2020? I don't think so, but I think there's a really fair question to say that he's probably not going to be, because he has such an uphill climb, especially on a team that doesn't project to be that good. Like, he has to be so good. He has to lift a bad team out of the doldrums to where they're not tempted to pick a quarterback next year. That's the only way he really survives in Superflex. But there's some appeal to him, because I know there's probably one or two people in my league that are like, dude, I love this guy. I love his stash. I love how he goes out there and just plays like he doesn't care. So there may be some value in picking a player like that. So that's how I'm usually approaching Dynasty. Even if I'm a win now team, I think this is one of the things I'll talk about a little later. Even if I'm a win now team, I am willing to trade assets that I'm getting good value for. And I think that's a concept that a lot of people don't do. They have a contender, so they immediately put all these players on the can't touch list. Cannot touch them. Will not trade them if I'm a contender. And I think that's doing it wrong, because I think there's a margin to where you can still contend. You can build a team that contends over and over and over every single year, and you can still trade assets that are winning you now points during the season when you're winning. So it's just a constant turnover of assets. So if I can get a good deal, that's usually the way that I'm always playing. So I don't ever see a team where I have a window. Ideally, your window never closes. It never has to open, and it never closes. It's just a constant cycle of always gaining value on your portfolio.
So I'm with you with the always gaining value. I'm a little circumspect with without putting players' names to it, it's kind of difficult. I'd be reluctant to trade, say, Julio Jones for DJ Chark and a second during the season for contention. And I get your point, because DJ Chark's still going to drop, 15 to 20 points a week. Then you have the first to play with in the future. So it's beautiful things that could happen. But that said, I am a little myopic when it's like, all right, well, I'm in season. I need that Julio to give me the 40 points a week that he can give me. And I think he gives me the better chance to win the championship right now. But even though doing that does hurt your approach or your chance to win the following year, because then you still have DJ Chark, and then you have the asset, and then you could take that asset and build on it. And you're like me in that way, where it's like, all right, well, I'm adding this asset to that asset, and I'm going to get this stronger asset. I've talked about that before, though, when specifically at running back or wide receiver, where I talk about always sell guys that are outperforming their priors, guys that basically aren't supposed to be doing what they're doing. I can't remember who it was last year. I kept getting into an argument with one of my co-hosts, Michael Sipes. I forget the specific player, but he almost doesn't matter. So it was like a 4th round running back And he was, performing as an RB1. To me, I said, well, that's the time to sell. You sell him right now because he's going to fall back to earth. And now I'll have a first round rookie pick that the hit rate's going to be much higher. So I guess it's similar. That's a similar approach. It's just I'm more specific to the types of players that I'm going to do it to. I'm only going to do it with guys that I think, or not I think, but based on past history, are going to bust out. Problem with that is too, you look at the 2020 draft with the depth and talent, a 4th round wide receiver might be the new 3rd round wide receiver. So that'll skew everything. But I do love the assets thing because that's the one good thing about always having assets is you can always make a move. So I do know when I'm constructing a team, I never do a productive struggle and I generally don't do an all in. Where I'm trading every future draft pick that I can to build the strongest team possible right now. I'm trying to build a team with upside, but with enough outs that I can go either way if I have to. If it ends up that I draft it poorly, well, I still have, players that I can sell or I have players that I can trade high. Or if I have a team that, performs a little higher than I thought they could, well, then I still have those rookie picks to sell. And I still have the younger assets that I can sell too, to get a Julio Jones and take the bullet there, knowing that he's going to give me a year or two. I just think it's funny because when we talk about windows, there's so much that goes into it that we almost think we can predict what's going to happen in the NFL. And before I get back to that topic, or I go off on that topic, I should let you come back in and tell me where I was wrong or where I was right, because I like hearing that I'm right as well.
Well, I think that, so you gave an example of a player, and I'll just piggyback on that player. DJ Chark in a second for Julio Jones, right? Now, I think important context is if you're in a startup draft and you're doing the startup draft in February or March or something like that, like that's the kind of deal I would do right now. That's the kind of deal I would do in the summer because there's too much unknown about what's going to happen with Julio Jones versus DJ Chark. It's not inconceivable that Chark is better than Julio Jones. How do we know Julio Jones doesn't get hurt in the preseason? How do you know his quarterback doesn't go out for some reason? There's so much that's unknown. So I do think context is important as to what the definition of assets changes during the season, right? Like that's a deal. If Julio Jones is the wide receiver 1 through 6 weeks and Matt Ryan's healthy and they're doing exactly what the projections say they should do, top 2 or 3 in the league in pass attempts, and Julio Jones is the best receiver, and DJ Chark is, let's just say, a wide receiver 2 or so. Maybe he's a 25th receiver or something during the season. That's a little harder deal to stomach if you're a contender. But the thing is that the value probably changes at that point. You're going to have a harder time getting that deal, if you're the DJ Chark owner at that point, right? The Julio owner is going to be less likely. They're going to be in the position like you just said. Hey, I'm probably not going to do that deal when I'm in first place and Julio Jones is smashing. So I think that the value there would change, where I think the assets in that deal, DJ Chark in a second for Julio, that's a deal I would do right this second if somebody wanted it. If somebody wanted to offer that deal to me, I would take it now because I'm doing it where what really is Julio Jones right now? What is his value? If I'm asking you this question, what is his value right this second? Not even in picks. What is his value to you in Dynasty?
Harder. You got to make it all hard. Picks I could just throw out, be like, oh, late first, because it's so non-specific.
Forget about picks. Why would you want Julio Jones in Dynasty? For what reason?
It'd have to be one now. There's no other.
It's September to December in your lineup, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you're making that move during that window of time, then that short-term window, that 3-month window, is basically where those assets would make sense for you to make that trade. Outside of that window, it makes no sense for you to make that trade. So, that's almost the definition of what we're talking about, but on a much smaller scale. If you're playing this way, say you're trying to play in a 3-year window, right? But you're looking at a running back after the season. Let's just take Kenyon Drake after this season. Let's say Kenyon Drake's a running back 1, right? After this season. What's going to happen with Kenyon Drake's value in February? Even if he has a great season, what's going to happen to it? Where do you think it's going to go, up or down?
Plummets.
And it plummets not because he's bad. It plummets not because he wasn't good last year. It plummets because it was probably sky high during November and December when he's playing in your lineup during the playoffs, it was probably sky high. To get him during that time from the team that had him, especially if that team is, let's say that team's a playoff team. I'm a playoff team and I have Kenyon Drake and he's a fifth, running back 5 on the season. I would still sell him on the right team, depending on what I get. But as soon as that season ends, his value plummets. So really your windows in Dynasty, A, it depends on when you're doing the draft and where your league stands. But B, it's all just about the timing of the trades. It's all about what the assets look like when you're doing the trade. So I would do the Chark and second for Julio right now. But if all things hold steady and both of their situations are what they are, we're projecting them fairly accurately going into 2020, I may be less apt to do that deal during the season unless you're taking the approach like I do. And that's easy because I play in so many leagues. I can do that deal during the season and say, you know what? Julio Jones could get hurt tomorrow. And now all of a sudden I'm laughing to the bank because I have a healthy DJ Chark and the second round pick. And the best part about that this year, and we'll do another show on this coming up in the future, we don't even know what the hell this season's going to look like. I mean, half the guys we're sitting here thinking we're confident putting in our lineups that we think we're spot on with what their values are, they may not even play. They may miss multiple games for complete unforeseen circumstances. So the process of that deal, the asset of getting that second rounder, that can bail me out if the Chark versus Julio debate goes wrong. Let's say both of them cancel each other out and they're both out. I now have the extra second. I can go buy Marvin Jones or Jamison Crowder or one of those guys that's probably going to cost me a second during the season, but I have insurance to back it up. So that's how I typically play. And receiver, you're right on it with me. Receivers are so easy to make those moves. If you're willing just to throw me seconds for neutral moves between receivers like Chark and Julio, I'll do 5 of those deals. Now I own half the second round, and I'll take on your squad with the extra 5 second rounders. And I still have receivers that I got back that I can still maybe play heads up against you and beat you 30-40% of the time.
Yeah, and I know we did say we weren't going to get into specific players too much, but I know I have a guy that keeps trying to trade me Kenny Golladay, and he doesn't seem to understand that because he does things like, oh, well, I'll send you Kenny Golladay for your Jalen Reagor and your DJ Chark. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, first of all, DJ Chark and Kenny Golladay are close enough to me that I'm not throwing in a rookie first to that. That's basically
Jalen Reagor from you. Come on, no chance.
I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, I don't bleed Eagle Green anymore, but look, I'm still affected by 40 years of biases there. So one thing we talked a little about, but I just thought it was interesting. I don't know if it exactly buys into Windows, but I know I do this a lot, where I try to win every week before the season by drafting a guy. Or let me put it another way. I'm trying to win a season drafting a player without thinking about how he can help me win week to week. So I'll often overlook a guy like Latavius Murray or Adrian Peterson or maybe even Chase Edmonds this year, where these guys aren't going to help me win every week. They're just not. But there's weeks that they could help me win. But because in my mind, I need to win every week, I don't draft them, which I don't know if that's really a Windows conversation or something else, but it feels like it fits into that conversation a little bit.
Well, one thing I'll say to that is, this is if anyone pulls up like DLF's ADP, for instance, you can take a look at it and you can kind of just ballpark where there's a break at each position. Let's just say you look up the positional ADP at each position, right? You can kind of ballpark where in those ranges it kind of cuts off and it goes from like players are valued because of their age and because of their upside immediately to like, hey, these guys are scoring points now, so I can't drop them any further. Like Julian Edelman is a guy that Julian Edelman and Larry Fitzgerald, if you look at their history of ADP on DLF, at some point right around like 31, it just levels off, but it really doesn't drop any further after that. The only time like Fitzgerald's ADP has dropped in the last 5 years is literally like when there's that period of time each year where it's like, oh, dude might retire, so it goes down a little bit. But other than that, it stays the same. And that's because that's kind of like the flipping the switch in a startup where people say, you know what? Edelman is literally week to week, definitely year to year, but week to week. If Edelman were to tear an ACL or something like that, his career is probably over. So it's literally like week to week on his value. So I am purely drafting him for points. If you select Latavius Murray in a startup, That is literally, I'm putting him on my team and just praying that there's 2 weeks during the season where he makes sense to put in my lineup. Because you're never going to be able to flip him. The only person you'd ever be able to flip him to would be the Kamara owner. And the only time you'd ever be able to flip him would be if he does have that, well, hey, Kamara's out 4 weeks with a, MCL strain. So Latavius is going to start for 3 straight weeks. But guess what? If you drafted him, you don't want to trade him when that happens. That's why you picked him, so you can put him in your lineup. So ADP levels off to where, look at somebody like James Washington. Where is James Washington in ADP? He's there in the ADP because he's not there because because of his age. It doesn't matter when you're taking a wide receiver 64, how old he is. He's not being valued because of his age. People have already told you they don't see any upside in that player. So you can actually get away with kind of mining value in those ranges, and you're not having to pay for the age. You know what I mean? You're not paying for his age discount because people have already written him off because of the age. So that's another thing with windows is it doesn't mean, you draft all old players when you get to late rounds in startups, because typically if you're doing like a Ryan McDowell productive struggle, you're punting year one. You're trying to actually avoid points in your lineup. But you can still get young player value later on in startup drafts too, because there is a point where the value just starts to level off. People are drafting Julian Edelman and Jamison Crowder and Marvin Jones, and they're doing that over James Washington and Paris Campbell. They're taking those guys maybe over them strictly for points in their lineup. So
I agree with you. So one thing, just to kind of use, I guess we should give the people that watch this some actionable intel, I guess, or things to think about, I guess. I really don't want to because I kind of I look at fantasy football analysis, at least from the perspective that I'd like to think that we bring it from, is the same as where I try to do things in other life. Like I'd rather make you think and expand your thought process than actually give you answers, because that's going to be more valuable than me going, hey, select B. If I explain to you why you need to select B, why I think you should select B, or hey, this is actually why I think you might select A, but it brings you around the B, I much rather do that. But some actionable or some things you should think of when you start thinking about, well, I'm going to play in windows because that's 4 years is my window, 5 years is my window. I just looked it up before we jumped on. Do you want to venture a guess how many NFL teams have the same head coach today that they had in 2016?
Same today as 2016. I would say 7.
10. So that's more than a third, less than a third of the league has the same head coach as they did 3 years ago. 4 years ago, if a 2020 season actually happens. If you go back to 2018, 17 teams have new head coaches since 2018 or later. That's 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about playing in 3-4 year windows, we're talking about playing in windows that don't even actually exist, because the NFL teams aren't even giving head coaches 3 years to make things work. And every time there's a change in the NFL head coach, there's a change in the scheme just about. It's very rare that a head coach leaves, a new guy comes in and he's like, yep, everything's going to stay the same on offense. And if you play IDP, well, then there's no chance that both sides of the field are going to stay the same. So I just looked that up. I thought that was interesting because the NFL is constantly churning. So if you're basing your decisions off of what you think, let's just say the Washington soon to be named something else team is going to do, well, let's see, you were basing that last year off what you thought Jay Gruden was going to, how he was going to, use Haskins. Now you need to recalibrate your thought process to go, okay, well, now Ron Rivera's there. Well, guess what? In 2 years, when Ron Rivera gets fired, you'd have to recalibrate your thought process again. So anything beyond 2 years to me would seem just folly, because you're basing it on the NFL. Everything they do is on quicksand. Nothing's on concrete. It's always moving.
Well, in the NFL also, I mean, we've talked about this before on our shows, that the NFL has devalued running backs to the point now where a running backs window isn't even 4 years in the NFL anymore. They're basically going to get to their rookie contracts, and unless they're first round picks, they're probably never even going to get to the 5 years with their incumbent team that drafted them. There's very few, and this will be big. This conversation could change if a bunch of these 2017 rookies end up getting contract extensions this year. But I venture to think I don't think it's going to happen. I think a lot of them are going to end up testing the market and they're going to be disappointed. So we may see a bunch of new landing spots next year. A lot of these guys may change around and fill each other's teams when they leave and hit free agency. But also, quarterbacks have changed. The trajectory of quarterbacks have changed too. I don't think teams are necessarily looking at all these quarterbacks that they draft in the first round just because you're a first round pick, especially if you're not a first round pick. I don't think the NFL teams even play in 3 or 4 year windows with quarterbacks anymore. I mean, if you're bad by like year 3 or year 4, like Trubisky, you're never going to get past that. And the thing about dynasty owners is dynasty owners have usually made up their minds after 3 years anyway. So it's hard to get out before the end. If you're waiting until the NFL to get out before you get out as a dynasty owner, you've already lost. Because the perception has probably already gone downhill on a player. It was downhill on a guy like Trubisky last year. So if you're trying to get out now, what's the point? Okay. So, I mean, we look at that 2 major positions right there for dynasty where the NFL teams really aren't even playing in more than 3 year windows. So why would we think we can play in longer than 3 year windows when we're also dealing with coaching changes and scheme changes? We don't care about contracts. We only care about contracts to the extent that it affects what team and what scheme the player's in. That's it. But
and we don't. And honestly, as a large part of our community, and this doesn't just I'm not excluding myself from this. I don't think most of us quite understand contracts either. Right. Because we're going off what Spotrac or Over the Cap has, which is really good information. It's not all the information, because there's been plenty of times where you come across a player contract like Lev Bell a couple years ago and realize, wait, he doesn't have to report at all, and his season's still going to toll. He is a unrestricted free agent. When for the first 8 weeks of the season, everybody was under the impression that he had to show up by week 10, and we based our decisions off that. And then to find out in like week 8, it was like, oh wait, no, we were wrong. So I think it is always funny too that we always bake in this cap stuff like we have any idea how that's going to really play out. Like, I mean, there's some contracts that you can look at and go, okay, that's a poison pill. That is, they're not going to pay him $70 million in the 4th year of his contract. I can guarantee they're going to cut him. But so many of the other contracts are more nuanced than that. I just felt the need to jump in and cut you off, because if I didn't, it really wouldn't be a show that I'm part of.
Nah, man, you're all good. I appreciate your input. That you're right on contract. You hear people speak about contracts all the time. Well, this guy can be cut after 2021 easily. He's gone. And then as soon as that narrative starts getting out there, people start assuming that's going to be a fact. And then, we've already seen it. I was guilty of it, talking about how many of these 2020 unrestricted free agents are going to hold out, right? And I do think that narrative, not just me, but a ton of people, that narrative has actually driven their values down a little bit. And, we might be down on Dalvin Cook or Joe Mixon or Alvin Kamara or Aaron Jones. But, dude, Aaron Jones signs a 4-year extension with Green Bay tomorrow. He jumps right back up in the top 10. We did the same thing with Austin Eckler. People rid him off, and then boom, signs an extension, and he's comfortably in the top 15. So that could happen at any minute. So I do think we have to be fluid with our process on especially running backs. But I think just actionable advice would be, take each position and you have to look at it differently. You have to manage the assets at each position. Even if you disagree with me or you disagree with Shane in our process, if you listen to me or you listen to Shane, I bet you we've spelled out our process on receivers, running backs, tight ends, quarterbacks. Like, you don't have to follow it, but I do think you have to take each position and you do have to kind of decide how you want to play. How do you play running backs? Do you like to buy guys after they've hit that peak and take your gambles there? Do you like to sell guys early and just pick up rookies, knowing that if they hit, they're going to be way more valuable than the incumbents? And then same thing with receivers and tight ends and quarterbacks. So you have to kind of create your own window for each position and just play that way and just adapt to what the NFL does, because the NFL changes so much from 3 years ago to today. If you look at the ADP of running back, just for instance, 3 years ago, and then you look at today, 3 years ago, you were getting discounts on young guys. Now it's like, dude, J.K. Dobbins is a backup for 2020. He's running back 11 already. And I would even say that's a good price to buy him at.
Yeah.
Because if he does anything, he's running back 6 next year. And because that's just the way the community goes with running backs now. So I say just take each position, develop your process, and just play based on assets. Constantly be trying to flip those players for what you think is better assets. And it has to be your process, which will determine how valuable those are.
And also just stop thinking that every move you make is your final move. Like it's not. I know we call it Dynasty and we talk about, I could roster these players forever. So I just went out, I wanted to look at a couple of my leagues. I looked at one league that is on, I'd say, the extreme end of trading, Dynasty Trades HQ OG Original League. And obviously that would probably be a little bit of an anomaly compared to most leagues, only because it's a lot of people in there based on, it's 16-team league, and it's based, the league itself is based off of a podcast that's based off trading. So it's probably a lot of people that like to trade. But I went back to the last 6 months, just the last 6 months, which is basically the entirety of the offseason. There was no real fantasy football to speak of in January, right? There's been 110 trades in that league in 6 months, just trades.
Wow.
Not to speak, obviously, of, because I didn't feel like looking it up, players cut, the draft, and things like that. So that's just, and I should have looked it up, but there's plenty of players that have been involved in those 110 trades repeatedly. And every time someone bought someone, say a DJ Moore, I'm sure they told themselves, I'm going to own this guy for the next 7 years. And then they traded him 3 months later, or 6 months later, or a year later. So then I did look at a one of my slower paced leagues. And even in that, we've had 16 trades in the last 6 months. And that's a 12-team league. Same thing. I didn't look at the players cut. Obviously, we've drafted players. So just there's this, I can't word it perfectly, but there's just this belief that we convince ourselves in that it's a dynasty league. I'm going to roster these guys forever. No one's going to do that. And we know that. None of us have the patience for that. Like, the reason we all love Dynasty is because we can do it all year round. It's not because we can roster the players for the rest of their lives, at least not from the large majority players that I've spoken to or played with. And I'm in, like you, I'm in 50 plus leagues. I talk to a lot of different people. You do the quick math. 50 times 12 is like 300 or something, probably. 600. I don't know. 600? Yeah, it's not terrible at math. Even if you take out, we'll say we take out 150 of those for repeat owners. Like, I've talked to a lot of those people. Not one of us really is it about, I get to keep this guy forever. It's really about, I get to run this roster forever and do what I want. We love trading. We trade when we're bored. Just think about the group me chats that you're in. People will literally go in group me chats and go, I'm bored. Let's make a trade.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind when, you're valuing a player, when you're valuing a DJ Moore, who I love, over Julio Jones is probably a bad example because he literally only has 1 year of high production left in him. But a player like that, like a guy that's 28, 29, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, because I know specifically there's been some DJ Moore for Devontae Adams trades where you get extra on the DJ Moore side, which is insane to me when you think about the fact that, look, you probably aren't going to own DJ Moore in your league in 3 years anyway. So does it matter if you had Devontae Adams for those 3 years and he helped you win a title? Maybe. I understand you could trade him later, blah, 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 blah. But just stop thinking that you're going to own a player for 5-6 years. You're not going to do it. Admit it to yourself. I've lied to myself and told myself I would too, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, and you just spoke perfectly. Becoming attached to players is great until you find yourself in a league where you're like, man, that trade would actually make sense. That it's, again, having a defined process. And you can have, Shane has his guys, and believe it or not, you will never hear me saying, oh, these are my guys, I'll never trade them, because I really never go public with any of that stuff. But I have my players too. And I have biases that will come out if you talk to me long enough. If you're in leagues with me, you'll see I have biases on players, even though I try to say that's not part of my process. I do have biases on some players. There's some players that, I'm attached to, that I like, that I really don't want to trade. But, I think it's just, if you get anything from this show, it's a discussion about the window, but kind of why we wanted to talk about how the window really doesn't exist. Trying to put yourself in a window, 3 years, 2 years. Like Shane said, who the heck knows what you're going to do in those 3 years? Half the owners could change over. B, tons of stuff could happen in the NFL. C, I mean, the league could fold in 3 years. So playing for 3 years from now, you hate to say it, but there's leagues that we're in today that will not be around in 3 years. Probably a fourth of the leagues we're in today may not be around in 3 years. I mean, that's just the reality of playing in Dynasty. So, all those factors aside, leaving yourself to just a process of a window and trying to fit everything in that window doesn't make sense. It's really just coming up a process on how do I manage these assets on my team? And however you want to go about that, position by position, ADP, with your own tiers, whatever. That's kind of why we wanted to do this video and talk about how the window really, in my eyes, and I think you kind of agree with me, the window really doesn't exist. When you define a window, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, because then your range of thinking starts to change a little bit around that time frame, going, well, I have to win a title by 2022. Well, no, if you have the right process, you can win a title in 2020 and maybe 2021, and you still may be able to win one in 2022. But really, you're just kind of set up to continually go year after year and make a run. You really never have to do I'm completely gutting my team and doing a full rebuild. You never have to do that. So any final thoughts on the topic, Shane?
One of these days we're going to do a topic on how come I can't figure out how to use a microphone or a phone, but that's another day. No, man, I think we covered it good. Well, yeah, we covered it pretty decently. I know, unfortunately, my mind starts to wander. So even if we started here in the window and I might have veered off, hopefully we brought it back for everyone. But no,
we don't have a window on this show. We just talk.
Heck yes. I said heck. I almost cursed, but I didn't. So, no, I mean, just, shoot up the comments if you have any comments on it, any questions. I just discovered that we have a DLF video channel and that we can reply to comments on it. I don't know if you knew that part, Scott. So if you have questions, comments, feel free to, add those, and one of us will go ahead and respond to you.
Yeah, and hit either of us up at Charles Chill FFB for me, at Shane is the worst for Shane. He's on Dynasty Trades HQ. I'm on Dynasty and Chill. Yeah, reach out to us. We'll really talk about. Shane and I have a great rapport. We love chatting with each other. We love kind of just picking each other's brains and listening to this theory and the process that we like to talk about. And I think the listeners enjoy hearing that stuff from us more so than, hey, Shane, what's your thoughts on this player on film, or, his metric profile? Like, there's so much stuff out there that already covers that stuff. I try to just use that as, to incorporate it into my process and use the people that really love doing that stuff, because that's not really my cup of tea, watching film on players and all that stuff. I'll leave that to the experts, pick their brains and use their information to develop my process. And that's how I'll usually manage my team. So hit us up. Let us know if you have any topics you want us to cover. And if you want to hear 30 minutes of just rambling on DLF about any topic, let us know and we'll be happy. So we'll catch you on the next video. Thanks, everyone.